3 lines from the bottom on Chavtes. So we were explaining that in Onim Gashmiyim, even in the lowest aspects of Gashmi, there is an element of Oineg, because they're all rooted, they're all coming from the Oineg that's in Gan Eden. It says Nohar Yitzim Eden, that Eden is the source of Oineg for all Inyonim that are in the world. Gam began Eden, yesh beginners that cham ruchni. Because in Gan Eden too, there is that aspect of doimim tzemei chai medaber ruchniyim. But of course, there it's in a different realm, in a different environment, and has a different level. But it's nevertheless a representative of these four aspects. As for example, the Karka Gan Eden, the ground of Gan Eden, Sheneda, about which it is known, Shehu Bechinas Horuchni Shehadale, the Soidas Gashmiyim, that this is the Ruchni element of the four Gashmizik Soidas. Gashmi Soidas is Eish, Ruach, Mayim, Ofer. These are the Yisoides of every Gashmi element. Yesh, Bechinas Tzemeyach, and then also there is the Tzemeyach element, Kumesha Kosu, as it says in the Pasuk, Vayatzmach Hashem Elokim, that Hashem caused it to grow, Kol Eitz Nechmed L'mara V'tiv L'machol. Every kind of tree that is pleasant to the sight and is good for food. And then there is an Neshomes U'Malochin Shebegan Eden. Then there is also the Neshomes U'Malochin in Gan Eden. Shehein Bechinas Chai U'Medaber. These are the two levels of Chai Medaber in Gan Eden itself. Shebechulam, wherein all of them yesh bechinas tainug eliki bechol prat u'prat. In all of them there is a bechina, there is the element of tainug eliki bechol prat u'prat, in every detail of all of them. Mipseil as hatainug shebegan Eden. And then, as I mentioned before, from the pseilas, from the refuse of the Tainug that's in Gan Eden. In other words, that aspect of Tainug that falls away from Gan Eden, that is no longer suited to be in Gan Eden. Nimshach, from that it is drawn with that Cham Shalamato. In the Oinag, in the Zeimen Tzemei Chai Medaber Shalamato, that is below. We'll move on. It's readily understandable. Shegam b'madrege hatachtoino mehatainug shebegan Eden, that even in the lowest madrege of the tainug that's in Gan Eden, harei zeh l'maylo harbe mehatainug hayeser elyon. It is much higher than the Tainug HaYoser Elyon, the supreme and the most high Tainug, Shebedatzcham HaGashmi, that is in the Mezim Tzemei Chai Medaber of the Gashmi. There is no comparison. Perhaps we will put some insight into this after we finish this discussion. Shekol hata'anugim hagashmiyim because all Ta'anugim Gashmi, all physical, tangible Ta'anugim, V'yav gam Ta'anug Bnei Yodom Haruchnim, even the Ta'anugim, the human Ta'anugim that are in the level of Ruchni, of spiritual Ta'anugim. Shehu HaTa'anug Shebeseichel V'Hasog, which is the Ta'anug that is inherent in the Seichel and Hasog. Over Midas, and also the Ta'anug that's in the Midas. Ukahai Gavna, and such other Yonim of Ta'anug that human beings exclusively have in the world because of their supreme quality, which is Ruchni Zike Ta'anugim. Arei Zeh Gashmi Legabe Madrego Hayeshe Tachteina Shebegan Eden. It nevertheless is Gashmi. We have to understand that is Gashmi. Relative to the Madrego Hayeshe Tachteina, the lowest Madrego that's in Gan Eden. All right, this is going on a little bit, so it would behoove us to get some understanding, a little bit of a handle on this, even though these are things which are quite obvious. It's obvious, but it's not obvious. It's obvious what the oinig that we have. But the oinig that's in Gan Eden is not that obvious. And therefore, when the Rebbe says that this is Gashmis relative to Ruchnis, at the minimum, it would be appropriate to identify where is the Ta'anug Gashmi in Seichel and in Midas. And then from this we can understand the way it is above, whether we will or don't, but it's important to understand our situation. We speak about the principle of the essential truth, the essential element in anything, the etzem. And we describe it in various ways, and to the point where we say that the essential thing does not really express, it cannot be defined in terms of time and space. It's a nakuda. It's one sharp point. We say that Chochmah, for example, is like a fleeting spark. This is really perhaps the most abstract presentation we have in Gashmis. The reason it's abstract is because it has no keli. When you have a fire, fire is also something which is elusive. What's fire? We can see the wood that's being burnt, but fire per se is the highest of the four elements, and there is no tangibility to it in the literal sense. But at least there is something to hold on to, and something that it holds on onto, and something that can be identified as its base. Whereas a spark does not have a tangibility, really. It has just the brightness and no tangibility. And it doesn't have a key. You can't capture a spark. And even so, it also has the element of time and space, because clearly a spark has the moment when it appears. That means that before it appears, it's not there. We understand that this Ayin, that before it appears it's not there, means to say that the spark is representing something that is not really representable in the full sense of the word, in Gashmius. And this is why when it comes to, it gets represented, it is represented merely as a spark. There is no graspable element at that moment as to what is contained in that spark. But nevertheless, a spark is already a representation of light. It is not the essence of it. But the representation is so pure that it is totally, it doesn't have, the representation element does not have a presence of its own. Like we say in Chokhmah. In Chokhmah there is no presence of its own. It is completely what it represents. The Oyneg HaNefesh. The Rotzen HaNefesh doesn't have its own presence. But nevertheless, it is a representation of that. But and the representation of that comes in that form because you cannot really represent it. Still, there is an element of representation.
Sorry, there is an element of
representation. Now we have to focus in on this which we have not described, and understand that the minute you speak about representation, you're not speaking about an essential thing. The essential truth does not need to be represented. It is an essential truth. In its own level of truth, it is always there. This is what we always quote from the Rambam, that the first principle upon which everything else is built, even Chokhmah itself, is to know that there is a first being. Now this knowledge, that's the first being, in knowledge, this is already a representation, a knowledge of it. Which is not, it does not come to be as a result of knowledge. Representation comes to be as a result of representation. You're presenting it in Chokhmah and in Bina and so forth. This essential basic truth is not based on representation at all. And this is why we say that this is a knowledge that precedes knowledge. Precedes Chochmah. Amud HaChochmas. Except that, because later you have to know. This knowing it is simply focusing in on that which we always know. Not knowing it means that you find out something. It's not possible for a human being to be without this knowledge. So we can now project and draw an understanding. The difference between the essence and the knowledge about the essence. The knowledge about the essence is very, very engrossing, very engaging, very illuminating, very effective. But there is a context. There is an experience to it. In other words, the oineg represented even the oineg in Chochmah. If we were to describe the oineg in Chochmah relative to the oineg the way it is in the nefesh, we would describe it as follows. Oineg is part and parcel of chayus. The difference between the way it is in nefesh and the way it is in Chochmah is that, I'll start from bottom up, is that in Chochmah the oineg is the experience of coming to life. Came to life. In the nefesh there is not that element of coming to life. Therefore the oineg in the nefesh does not have a relative element. Relative element means life versus not life. Or absence of life, or not experiencing life. So therefore clearly in the nefesh this in the oineg is infinitely superior. It is, from our perspective, approximating the oineg the way it is in the Elokus itself. Because it doesn't have a beginning. In Chochmah, it's also oineg to the point where it's called chayim, and it brings chayim, life, into the entire human structure. And there is, nevertheless, in this element of coming to life. Therefore, and this is in Chochmah, which does not have, it hardly has a keli. When you go further down into Seichel, v'hasaga, which is entirely on a graspable level, which has to have a hislapshus in keli. There for sure, it is oineg on the experiential level rather than on the essential level. Relative to the way it is in the nefesh, so it's relative to the oineg that in the world, relative to the oineg the way it is in Gan Eden. Gan Eden is ruchni, literally ruchni relative to Gashmis. Because in the world, the oineg has to be able to be identified from a Gashmi perspective. And in Gan Eden, it doesn't need to. And therefore, the oineg in Gan Eden is infinitely purer and true. And as we be discussing all the time, and the whole duration talking about oineg, that oineg is representative of the godly presence. That's what it says about oineg aleki. Okay.
In other words, what you just gave a whole exposition about the oineg in Chochmah versus oineg in a nefesh, it could be very well applied seemingly to the experience in Gan Eden versus experience of this world, because in Gan Eden it is constant, and in this world it has to be found, just like Chochmah has to find. There is a moment where it's not. So this world by itself, the whole fabric of it is such that there is no continuity to it. There is no consistency. Is it true? That's what you...
What's the point? I'm not catching the point.
I'm trying to say that, I'm trying to understand whether you mean to apply the exposition that you just made, comparing oineg in Chochmah versus oineg in the nefesh, to the oineg in Gan Eden, to the experience in Gan Eden versus even lowest aspects of it versus experience in this Olam Hazeh Gashmi.
Yeah. Well, I'm not comparing. I'm giving that as a lesson to understand the difference.
But is that why it fits so well? Because in this world, the whole world is precarious existence. It's to find something real in this world, you have to really look for it and then find it. And before you found it, it's kind of not there. But as whereas in Gan Eden, it's a reality.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Let's continue. V'goveya me'al goveya shomer. Goveya me'al goveya shomer. This is actually a pasuk. I believe in Koheles, where he describes the entire structure of creation. Goveya me'al goveya shomer, that each higher has another higher that is protecting and shomer, safeguarding and guaranteeing the presence of the lower higher. Which means every higher has another higher that's yet higher that protects that. Where the Tainug that is in Gan Eden HaTachton, that is in the world on the level of Asiyah. Nimshach meGan Eden shebeyitzira ubriya. And there is a Gan Eden Tachton. In Gan Eden HaTachton, in every one of the worlds of Briya, Yitzira, Asiyah. And it all is coming from high Madre Gan Eden. At she'shoyresh kulam hu me'om atzilus. And then ultimately, the shoyresh and the root of all of the Gan Eden levels. And the oineg that's in Gan Eden is me'olam ha'atzilus, is from Atzilus. Ukenoida, as it is also known, sheyesh bechinas atzmcham ba'atzilus. That in Atzilus also there is that bechina which is called atzcham. שזה עניין השמוי שיש למלכוס. This union that there is, that's Cham, Doimim Tzemei Chaim Medaber, in Atzilus. This is alluded to by the fact that we have different names that we refer to Malchus, which we refer to Malchus. Shepiyomim Nikro B'Shem Evan Ve'ofor. Occasionally Malchus is referred to as Evan, stone, offer, and dust. U'Pa'omim B'Shem Shemshano V'Tapuach. And sometimes Atzilus is, Malchus, Atzilus is referred to as a flower, a rose, and a tapuach, and an apple. And then occasionally Malchus is referred to as Behema. V'gam nikro Odom. And also, ultimately, it is also called Odom.
How do we talk? Where's Malchus come in? We went from Atzilus to Malchus. Why do you bring in Malchus?
Malchus is the mokir of the Gan Edens of the lower world, of Bria Tzirasi.
Malchus of Atzilus.
Huh?
Malchus of Atzilus.
Malchus of Atzilus. Therefore, if there is Doimim Tzemei Chaim Medaber in Bria, it is due to the fact that in Malchus there is also Doimim Tzemei Chaim Medaber, but it's in a different level. Okay, that's not enough yet. And similarly, Gam Ba'atzilus Bichlal, even Atzilus in general, which means not Atzilus as it is the source for Bria, the Malchus element Atzilus, but Atzilus itself. Yisa Ba'alei Chayim, Yisa Beit Chayim. It's brought down on its Chaim sheyesh bechinas that's Cham ba'atzilus. It says in its Chaim that there is the bechina of that Cham in Atzilus itself. Lihiyois, being that Atzilus hu bechinas mokir kloli, being that Atzilus stands for a mokir kloli, for a general source l'chol ma shenizhaba b'biyah, for everything that came to be in Biyah. And everything has its root in Atzilus. In other words, in everything in Biyah, even that in Gashmis, there is an element of a godly element, an element of truth, of Atzilus level truth in it. Except it goes through various rungs. Now, Gam she'atzilus mugdal b'yerech mibiyah. Although that Atzilus is separate completely in a different category, totally from Biyah. From Bria. And relative to Bria, it's not called a creation. It's called an emanation. It emanates from Elokus itself, from Atzmus. Nevertheless, yet still, Hareze Memutza, Atzilus, constitutes the possession of Memutza, of the intermediary, in Oirin of Hamatzil Nivroyi. Between Oirin Soiv Hamatzil, the Matzil, which is Oirin Soiv literally, and Atzilus serves as the Memutza to connect and interconnect, and therefore bring an element of Oirin Soiv into Nidma. And the Rebbe explains, we're going to discuss very briefly, Ayin, And the point in this is, how's Atzilus? Atzilus is Olam Ha'eliki. How does Atzilus serve as a Memutza? A Memutza has to have some similarity to that to which it is Mamtzi. So the point is, Lihiyo is the Atzilus who his galus the Yerisoy Borom. Being that Atzilus is the his galus of Yerisoy Borom. Shebo mehahelem al hagilu. That Atzilus is with the Yerisoy. There is an element of Gil that comes, as we point out, that comes from Helem to Gil. Even though there's no change, it is the same that is in the Helem, that is what comes with Gil. That's why it's called Atzilus. Atzilus means, it says an emanation. Another term, another meaning of what Atzilus, as we mentioned, that it's the closest, it stays with him. It is not something separate. Nevertheless, there is an element that his galus mehahelem. This element that there is in his galus, that makes it in approximation to the creation. That gives it an element where it can relate to creation. And here we have to interrupt. All right, Baruch Hashem, the phone held out today. Have a good day. This is it for today. Hello?
Yes, sir.